This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Welcome into another episode of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Today we continue our examination of Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District race, the seat being vacated by Congressman Jim Langevin, welcoming in David Segal, one of the Democratic candidates for this office. We've had Seth Magaziner, the General Treasurer of Rhode Island, on. We've had Joy Fox, who's also running in this primary. And we'll see who else joins us here as we continue to break this race down. But you know, there's been a lot of buzz about David Segal and his entry into this race in not only progressive circles, but Rhode Island politics as a whole, that he could be somebody that, you know, with expanded name recognition and, frankly, grassroots door-to-door operations could pose as a serious challenger to Treasurer Magaziner. Now, of course, the most recent polling data conducted by Fleming and Associates and published by WPRI and Roger Williams University showed that the treasurer had a commanding lead on all of his opponents in this primary. But some internal polling put forth by the Segal campaign suggests that he is surging and starting to pick up some of those undecided, unknown voters. And in Congressional District 2, the amount of independent support that you can get, literally unaffiliated voter support that you can get, as with any race in the state of Rhode Island on a statewide or federal basis, right, is absolutely critical. And it's going to be interesting to monitor how that all plays out. So looking forward to seeing how this congressional race, not only through the course of the summer, but also in the autumn, in the general election matchup with whoever it is. Right now, the marquee matchup is Treasurer Magaziner versus former Cranston Mayor Alan Fung, right? Could that change? That's what makes this exciting. That's what makes this dynamic. That's what makes this important, right? Is for operationally for this campaign season to reflect your own curiosity and to reflect your own wants and needs and desires. That's what makes this whole process something worth believing in, not just having it preordained, right? So we're going to continue to dig deep on this. There's no question about it, this being the Congressional District 2 race. Lots going on right now, obviously, as we enter into what some would describe as peak season here in Rhode Island, right? Late spring, summer, early autumn. This weekend is PVD Fest, a great event that takes place from Friday through Sunday. All kinds of stuff going on downtown and beyond. And I will point out that I'm performing with my band and some special guests on Saturday, June 11th at 2 p.m. on the Snow Street stage downtown. But there's so much going on. You should check it out. Just Google PVD Fest and it'll take you to their website or to your preferred social media platform. We're going to have some coverage of the event on Bartholomew Town as well, both pregame and postgame, if you will. And probably day of, we'll have some stuff all over the social media pages. So just search for me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you prefer to obtain social media content. All right, without further ado, let's get to it. My conversation with Democratic candidate for Congressional District 2, David Segal, here on Rhode Island's podcast of record, Bartholomew Town. All right, so continuing our coverage of the Congressional District 2 race, and here we are, it's June 7th, which, by the way, that's in and of itself kind of wild. May just evaporated into thin air. But as we continue to approach September, and particularly with Rhode Island's sort of weird political schedule where there's an argument to be made that July and August, there's a degree of voters that are less in tune with anything newsy, politics or whatever, because of the beach and summer activities. This is a critical month. So I guess I will let the fine gentleman in front of me on the Zoom screen introduce himself, and then we'll get into the issues.
How long an intro would you like?
Oh, whatever you're feeling. I mean, that's the beauty of it.
Well, is this my chance to say why I'm running, or should I wait?
Yeah. Give us the whole that you just met me on the street and I'm definitely voting. And who are you and why should we vote for you?
So my name is David Segal. I'm running for Congress in CD2. And I've been fortunate to get to work on a whole slew of important issues over the last 20 years. First as a local lawmaker here in Providence, a member of the city council, and then as a state lawmaker. And for the past 10 years until I started doing this as the ED of a national progressive organization. And I think that Rhode Islanders are rightly frustrated because we know the government should be able to do more for us. And there are key issues that have gone unaddressed in many cases for decades or more. And I'm talking about bread and butter concerns, creating a fairer economy, securing universal high quality healthcare, accelerating the transition to a renewable energy economy that creates good jobs and helps save the environment. And I think that people know that the system isn't working because of the influence of corporate spending and special interests, and they're losing faith in our democracy. I think we need leaders who can regain their trust. And the way I've always worked is to try to build coalitions around points of commonality and coalitions that are strong enough to overcome those corporate interests, those special interests, and make real changes that impact the lives of everyday people. And I think that's the kind of leadership that we need right now, and it's why I'm running for Congress.
And there's so much in there that you said that we could probably do an entire podcast on like 5 subcategories right there. Let's start with the practical side of things. This race opened up when Congressman Langevin announced that he wouldn't be seeking re-election. He's more of a moderate, somewhat on some positions. He leans conservative, and CD2 as a whole, the sort of, I don't know if it's generic, but just the quick view version of CD2 versus CD1 in Rhode Island is that it's a more conservative district. So let's start with this notion of running on a more progressive platform in a district that right now Republicans nationally have a thought that they may be able to win. How do you position yourself in that political environment?
And we could do a dissertation on that intro to the question.
And I'm not saying that's even necessarily true. I'm saying it from just how it's perceived.
So I think there are elements of that perception of the district and of Congressman Langevin that they're accurate, and others that are less so. And I'm not attributing that to you particular, that opinion, but you're obviously the what you just spoke to is a refrain that one hears not infrequently. So Congressman Langevin, for instance, is a Medicare for All co-sponsor, and wins this district pretty handily in the primary and also in the general. He won by, I think, 17 points last cycle. I think that this is a populist district and one that understands that we need to take measures to make government more for people, to push back against outsized corporate power, to ensure that we have an economy that works for everybody. And my pitch in the general election goes back to some of what I spoke to at the top, that I have a 20-year track record of building broad coalitions to get things done for everyday people. And if a coalition were progressives alone, it would not be broad. My work is entailed working with traditional Democrats, with independents, and even with Republicans when we find a point of commonality. And that's reflected in work to push back against the power of corporate monopolies, to push back against our propensity to get embroiled in disastrous military conflicts abroad, and to elevate diplomacy within our foreign policy. Concerns around surveillance and civil liberties, government transparency, government capacity, a host of issues where I regularly work with people from across the political spectrum. And I think voters in a general will appreciate somebody who doesn't just dismiss them because we disagree on 1 out of 30 things, but who looks for opportunities to work with them and who has a track record of doing so, because that's the only way we can overcome the impediments to getting things done that help working people.
Yeah, that's completely true. Is no question about it. The overlap of, like you said, even sometimes Republicans and progressives is actually sometimes more common, or there's more commonalities than with, say, more conservative or traditional Democrat, at least here in Rhode Island.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate it. Like, this is not what I'm coming from perspective where I totally understand that we're going to disagree on a lot of things, but we also are going to agree on more than, say, the factionalism on social media and on the increasingly polarized, television media would have us believe. And we're encouraged to hate one another and to think the least of one another. And there are really sharp disagreements that are really important. I don't think I'm going to have commonality with libertarian Republicans on Congress or self-styled libertarians. Libertarian has a variety of different meanings, but with
right.
Freedom Caucus Republicans on an issue like choice or on an issue like gun control, I'm steadfastly progressive on those concerns. But on some of these other issues, there are, for a variety of different reasons, we could try to deconstruct a bit, moments of overlap. And when we do something like pass legislation or advance legislation, there are several bills I'm following right now in Congress to constrain the power of big tech, or when we try to push back against an unauthorized participation in the Saudi-led war in Yemen, which is one of the broadest humanitarian catastrophes in the world, there are moments of overlap, and I will be looking for those moments and speaking to them should I make it to the general election.
All very interesting stuff there, including the notion of libertarianism, which, I mean, obviously, like, the European definition is totally different than, what we've come to know here in Rhode Island. But there's just like you said, that populist concept. That's interesting because that's something that both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump ran on and had success with. And that's a really interesting way to think of the second congressional district in Rhode Island. It's less faction oriented and more common needs oriented, I suppose.
I think that, I think there are a lot of people who share these concerns about, just knowing the economy is not working for them for a variety of different reasons, but understanding that, corporate power as is exercised upon them directly as workers, as consumers, as small business owners is a part of it. And moreover, that the influence of corporate spending in our politics skews things away from what is best for everyday people.
So I want to get into specific issues and sort of let you tee off on some of those, but there's, the politics of it as well. The most recent public-facing polls, in fact, really the only public-facing poll so far, conducted by Joe Fleming, widely regarded as a very competent pollster, and I believe it was sponsored by WPRI and Roger Williams. It showed that Treasurer Magaziner is in a completely you can't even call him a front runner. He's just so far out in front of the rest of the pack. However, I think he had 33%, but there's a large chunk of undecideds. You have a poll that it seems you conducted within the campaign or is not so public facing. You told Ian Donis on the Public's radio and put forth some numbers in a press release that show you're actually gaining traction, especially amongst those undecided voters. Do you feel that on the street? Do you feel like your name recognition, that people who are saying, we need a new figure in statewide / federal politics, and you're that person? You get the sense?
I think the response has been really great. And so what the polling showed is that among folks who are highly attuned to this race at this stage, inclusive of folks who are listening to this right now, most likely, that we are surging and that we're now at like 17.5%, I think is the number. I don't have this in front of me, back by about 10 points or so. And these are people who are highly attuned to who's running. And over the course of the summer, of course, more and more people are going to fit that category. I think that just over the course of the last few weeks when we're out on the doors, making phone calls, engaging with folks, it seems like people are right now really beginning to become attuned to the contours of this race. And as people hear more about me and the work I've done and the message of our campaign, which I will repeat again, the government should be able to do more for people, and that I've got a 20-year track record of building coalitions that are capable of making that happen, overcoming corporate interests and special interests to do so. I think people really take to that. And so we're just planning to continue to make sure that we get that message out through all available channels, doors, phones, texts, and over time through paid media and earned media. I'm sure there'll be a whole host of debates over the course of the summer. Yeah,
I certainly hope so. I mean, I hope that there's a lot of debate and a lot of forum activity for people to really take in. Plus, like you say, the earned media side of things, it's critical that there's a focus on the race as a whole, not just, okay, here's the candidate that we're going to, sort of create into a media figure because we've decided that person is in the lead in polls or whatnot. They'd be fleshing out ideas and differences. This is something that I'm sure you as well, and I'm sure most listeners have this sense that Congress, I think it's more so on the Senate side, but just Congress as a whole right now is broken. You know what I mean? And we look at what's going on with the gun violence, not just in the last couple of weeks, which has been utterly traumatizing, but just, I think we're about the same age. I was in middle school or early high school, I guess, when Columbine happened, and you fast forward over the course of these formative years of our lives and this recurring trauma, and where I grew up in the woods, people had guns. Nothing like this, though. This is nuts. So you look at that one issue. Can Congress, and if you were elected to Congress, could you be a facilitator of moving critical issues that the vast majority of the country seems to agree on forward and get by the broken system that Congress currently at least operates in?
So I think the honest answer is that on many of these issues, like they are ripe for movement, and it's part of why I keep speaking to and why I've been really happy to get to work on these monopoly concerns. For instance, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, who is part of a movement that I've been able to participate in to elevate anti-monopoly policy and protect consumers and workers, small businesses from various corporate predations, got confirmed, I want to say, with 22 or 24 Republican votes. And some of the other issues I've talked about, like pushing back against militarism and elevating Congress's authority over when we go to war or not, we can get things done on those issues, in part because there is some cross-partisan esteem for them. Other issues are going to be harder, and I don't want to be dishonest about that. I think that we see that there are real structural impediments to making progress. But what I think we need, and what I have always represented during my time in office, is somebody who is always looking for the opportunity to make movement on an issue of concern, and who's in constant communication with the grassroots, and who's not resting on his laurels, hoping to not have to take a hard vote, but who's trying to push these issues forward and is working to elevate them and ready and there when the moment comes to actually achieve something concrete. And so I would be in Congress with an organizer's mindset. I co-organized our Progressive Caucus when I was a member of the Assembly here, and would hope that my work doing so would create a context in which it's easier to get movement on these issues.
Where do you see, or what do you see as the issue that you can champion for the state of Rhode Island and Congressional District 2 in Washington, D.C., and serve as that ambassador back and forth between the federal government and the needs of not even the state government, but just the average person out in Pontiac Avenue in Cranston? So
I think Rhode Island is a wonderful and interesting place, and I love it. But I think that I think that people here care about the same issues that we find people across the country care about first and foremost. These are bread and butter concerns, like making sure that we have an economy where people can get by, more than get by, actually thrive, where we push towards full employment, where we're not under the thumb of corporate power, where we have a minimum wage that's a living wage, where we help revive and empower people to join unions. And I think people are concerned about the transition to renewable energy they want, especially in Rhode Island, I think notably because of the water in particular, but also like beautiful rural spaces that we want to be able to conserve, care deeply about the environment. And now beyond the usual reasons why people care about the transition to renewable energy, which of course protecting the environment and the ability to create high road union jobs, we also have gas price driven inflation as an immediate concern. And I think people care about broader access to healthcare. And I think people care about abortion rights. And I think people care about sensible gun control and so on. Rhode Island's specific issue an issue that disproportionately affects Rhode Island that I've been privileged to work on over the years is advancing renewable energy here. And that would remain a focus for me in Congress. When I was on the city council in Providence, I helped us pass a renewable energy mandate, and we got a commission in place that's run with that work subsequently to try to continue to advance renewables goals, fuel efficiency work, other environmental work. When I was a member of the House, even when we had a Republican governor, so this goes to some of what we were speaking about earlier, how to get things done, or can one get done in a Congress that feels jammed up, or should we lose one of the chambers to the Republicans, which I don't yet think is inevitable, but is obviously a risk. Even under a Republican governor, I was able to help move legislation to expand renewable energy production in Rhode Island 3 years in a row, to establish a climate change commission to help protect renewable energy funding, to support public transit, and so on. And so I think this work in particular would be a priority for me, but I think that people just want to be able to live decent lives and operate an economy where they and their families can thrive. And that's a universal want. And that would be a priority too.
What's your story as far as, personally? Did you grow up in Rhode Island, and how did you land in politics?
I grew up in Maryland, went to school in New York, and moved up here when I was 21, which is now, I guess, literally half a lifetime ago, and got involved as a rank and file activist in a couple of causes that were important to me at the time. One was to try to ensure that people who worked for the city of Providence and for big contractors and entities that were getting tax subsidies would be paid a living wage, which back then was 10-10, I think. It's kind of extraordinary to think about. And we made some progress on that issue. And some of that work's been carried forth over subsequent years by friends and allies like Rachel Miller, who now represents me on the city council. And it was also a moment where it was really important, as is sailing today, to ensure there was more civilian oversight of the police department in Providence, which, despite legitimate critiques of it, is very different than it was 20 years ago or during the CNC administration, for instance. And so I got inspired to be part of those movements, and then ran for office as part of those movements, because the person in the district I was representing was the deciding vote and was not with us on either of them at the time.
I think the police issue is something that is going to be, I don't know. Obviously there's localized funding and there's a lot of specific things that happen on the federal level, but in general, I think that's a question I'm guessing that you would get. Alan Fung has decidedly positioned himself as, this is a ridiculous way to put it, but it's a back the blue type candidate. Treasurer Magaziner has threaded that needle as well as he can. Other candidates have been less open about their position. Where do you sit on that? Do we need police reform nationwide? And if so, what does that look like?
I think we need to incentivize reforms. I think we need to incentivize civilian review boards, for instance, like the one we have instituted in Providence, which is perfect. But as an advance. And I support community policing as a concept. I think that we need more programs to disrupt the potential for violence, more support for entities like the Institute for Nonviolence, for instance. And I think that there's some evidence that those programs not being able to operate over the course of the pandemic for a variety of different reasons, financing and just people, various restrictions on employment and movement, especially during the pre-vaccine era, contributed to the uptick in violence that we've seen here and across the country. And so I wholeheartedly support those sorts of reforms.
This is a question that I think is just, I'm trying to balance it out because I find myself asking conservative and Republican candidates I suppose, opposite question. I'll oftentimes ask, would you accept Donald Trump's endorsement? Would you vote for Donald Trump as a citizen in 2024? So I'll ask the same of you. Would you accept President Biden's endorsement, and would you vote for President Biden in 2024?
I would take President Biden's endorsement. I think that's I don't know how likely that is at this juncture. I have critiques of him, but I've also seen him work well. Like I think there's a lot of folks presume this sort of binary between Bernie and Elizabeth, and I'm very proud to be associated with the two of them, to have Senator Warren's active support and to have been endorsed by Our Revolution, which is the organization Bernie started after the 2016 run, and some binary between the two of them and President Biden. Of course, they disagree on a number of issues, but they have also worked together on a number of issues, and I've been able to, in some cases, participate in the margins in that work. Observed other aspects of it. I think that Bernie, being the chair of the budget committee as the Biden administration took office, and led to a starting point, a floor for negotiations around the stimulus programs that was much more substantial than otherwise would have been. Senator Warren has succeeded at getting a lot of her allies into key regulatory posts across the administration. So at entities like the Federal Trade Commission or the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, for instance. And what one will find here, and I could say I have quantitative info to this effect, is that the vast majority of people vast majority of Democrats or Democrat-leaning independents have favorable feelings about all of them, even as they disagree with them on this or that issue. So I would accept his endorsement. I don't have any idea what's going to happen in 2024. A ton of speculation, of course, about whether or not he'll run again and who might run instead.
Last couple of minutes here. I wonder, you've gotten into something that is, I would imagine the campaign in and of itself is going to change your life. It's going to change your perspectives. If you get elected to Congress, that's a pretty big lifestyle change. Are you excited about or concerned about the thought of being back and forth between DC and Rhode Island, the logistics of it? You know what I mean?
So I've been for the past 10 years running a federal organization. And so in some ways, it's not that much of a change for me. I've also been a legislator for 8 years of my life. And part of why I'm running is that I work on these issues every single day. And I understand that we need more people in Congress who get up every day and ask what they can do to concretely make the world a better place for everyday people. And that's what's inspired me to run. Just, knowing how Congress works, knowing how to get things through, knowing how to block bad things from happening, knowing the interplay between the legislative branch and the executive branch, and how you can use a congressional office to try to compel the executive branch to do more. That might be an issue if we lose the House or the Senate. Most policymaking will probably end up happening through the executive branch, and there's a lot that can be done. And so I'm not particularly concerned about those things. It sort of comports with how I've been living for the last 20 years. And I am really inspired by the possibility of being in there and being able to wield a congressional office for all that it's worth to help the people of Rhode Island starting on day one.
Do you live in Congressional District 2?
I do. Federal Hill.
So no need to pack up and move. Last question here. Let's say, September 13th comes and you're the victor in the Democratic primary. Now you start day one of, well, maybe not day one, but public facing day one of a matchup likely with Alan Fung, unless Bob Lancia pulls off the upset of the century. What's your number one approach to differentiating yourself from Alan Fung besides the absolute obvious, which is, hey, look, you're in opposite political parties. There's some agreement on some positions, but by and large, you differ on most issues. Aside from the issues, just as a trustworthy figure, how do you line yourself up against Alan Fung?
Aside from the issues, just as a trustworthy figure, I think that if I'm understanding the question right, I think my answer would be back to what I was saying previously, just a 20-year track record of doing this work basically every single day. I'm very proud of what I've been able to accomplish across the issue sets we've talked about and others we haven't been able to speak to. And also the way that I've done it, really trying to work hand in hand with people, even when in office, trying to work with constituents and organizations to build potent coalitions that are able to push issues through that help everyday folks. And inclusive of doing a ton of bipartisan work that is really substantive. You're not nibbling around the edges, squishy work, and but really concretely finding those moments where people of varying backgrounds, varying ideological propensities agree about the thing in front of them, like monopoly policy, like anti-war policy, and driving that stuff home.
David Segal is running for Congress in the Democratic primary for Congressional District 2, one of a number of candidates, and it's going to be really interesting to watch. Hey, you can support the Bartholomew Town podcast for as little as $3 per month. Just head to patreon.com/BartholomewTown or click the support link wherever you're listening right now.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.